Now I would like to call upon stage Dr. Adil Rasheed, who is the Research Fellow, Coordinator of Counter-Terrorism at Manohar Parrikar Institute for Strategic Studies and Analysis, to speak on Asian India Moorings of Indian Strategic Thought and Culture. This module will be of 45 minutes, and I request the speaker to adhere to the timings.
Good morning, everybody. It is an absolute honor for me to be addressing you for the Usanas Foundation. I'm extremely grateful to Dr. Pandya and General Bell and Madam. It is a great privilege for me to be speaking today on a subject which fascinates all of us. But I would rather go about this subject in a different way, which might appear to be a diversion to begin with. But rest assured, I'm coming back to the main subject, and you'll find that there's a method to the different way in which I'm addressing the issue. Here, I'll be stressing first on strategic culture. What is strategic culture? So I'm talking about ancient moorings of Indian strategic culture. So for that, I need to first explain to you what strategic culture as a term means, and why was it coined, and what is its relevance. Now, whenever you are studying international relations, or you are studying in the field of diplomacy, or in warfare, or in statecraft, or in business, whenever you make a strategy, one should know about the other. One should know about the situation one is in, and one should know about the adversary one is facing. If your diagnosis of the problem is not correct, your strategy would also be flawed. So you should have the right understanding of a problem, the nature of a problem, and then you will be able to devise a strategy accordingly. Now, there were many ways in which strategies were being developed over a period of time. And by the time of the First and Second World War, a new theory came to the fore. It was by a great contemporary of Einstein, von Neumann. I think he is one of the greatest physicists of all time. Some people say he time traveled also. I don't know about that. But John von Neumann was a person who came up with game theory. Some of you might be knowing about it. And it was actually mathematical modeling, trying to make models on how, in a given situation, in an arena of war, how different parties would engage, and how the war will unfold. So what you do in that, you try to understand the situation of the adversary and the options available with the adversary and the possible choices that adversary would make. And then you are able to anticipate the several moves. It's just like a chess game. But there is an elaborate mathematical modeling around that, and that was called the game theory. And later on, if you have seen that wonderful movie, The Beautiful Mind, you have got this guy, John Nash, who comes with the Nash equilibrium. He actually further added to that game theory dynamic. And if you know about scenario building today in military warfare and other places, you know game theory is still being used. But over a period of time, there were some people who said that there is a flaw in game theory. The flaw in the game theory is that it is you're mathematically predicting how an enemy will behave. There is no room for the human element, the human idiosyncrasy, the completely different way an enemy will behave. You do not know about the enemy. So maybe in a given situation, it is not just the situation at that time which is dictating his moves, maybe something which is inherent within that player that may be the determining factor. And the problem came in a very big way when there was this rivalry between the Soviet Union and the US over the nuclear issue. And that gave rise to understanding in America of the Soviet mind. How do the Soviets behave if they have developed a nuclear option? will this, at what level will they think that, okay, let us go for a nuclear war? Maybe an American with a more liberal disposition, this is what Americans think about themselves. Maybe an American with a more liberal disposition may not go for that extreme option, but a Russian might. So they say that perhaps game theory is not the whole thing. We should understand the culture of a country. Just there's a psychology of an individual. What is the psychology of that country? What is the culture of that country? What kind of a history that country has had? What kind of evolution that country has had over time, and how we can know on the behavioral quirks, oddities, the idiosyncrasies of a country. Basically, how do different countries react in situations of crises? So that gave us the concept of the idea of strategic culture, that every country has a separate strategic culture. Every country has a separate. So, in order to understand the strategic culture of every country, a lot of things were studied. Their geography, their population, their dynamics, even their flora and fauna, all those things affect you. But very importantly, history and religion. Because these are the factors which have a very profound influence on the way of thinking, on the way you think of yourself and the way you think of the other, and the way you try to overcome a crisis. So from here we come to the, there was this great American theoretician, Jack Snyder, who in 1977 came up with the Soviet strategic culture, a paper in which he actually diagnosed the strategic culture of the Soviet Union. And as this school of thought, now it is in its fourth generation, there are a whole host of strategic thinkers who have taken the concept of strategic culture to newer realms. Earlier, people used to study only those texts which were related to strategy in a country. Like in India's case, to understand how Indian strategic mind works, people were focusing only on Arthashastra. Because Arthashastra is obviously a treatise on statecraft and warfare and economics. So it was in the face theoretical book. But what actually affects your behavior may not be a theoretical book. It may be a book of a different discipline altogether, but which may be affecting you at a subconscious level, which actually religious texts do. If you have been indoctrinated into a specific kind of a religious environment and value systems, that could affect you in the way you behave, unbeknownst to you. So now we study some of the foundational texts of countries and cultures in order to determine how whether a country will be aggressive or will be reflective or will behave in this way or that. So then the study of even non-strategic texts, even mythological texts and other texts of all kinds of science, and those started to be explored. And so we have a person, George Stanham, who came to India in 1992. In this game of trying to find out the strategic cultures of different countries, the Western world started to explore various countries. But soon it became like a propaganda thing also. So they started saying, our strategic culture, because we are a developed country, is much superior. And these developing countries, they do not have any strategic culture. So what was initially a research subject also started having a polemical value to it. And so this researcher from RAND, he came to India on a very whirlwind trip, and he met very senior officials. And ultimately he came to this very half-baked idea that India lacks in any coherent strategic culture. This in itself spawned, gave a wake-up call to us also. We started thinking of our own history and whether we have a strategic culture or not. Always it happens, West comes up with a new coinage and an idea, and then we respond to that. But then there has been a host of people who have been working in India and abroad to actually determine India's strategic culture, and especially the India's historical strategic culture. And they have been reading through India's various texts to find out how is it that the Indian mind works and Indian diplomacy works, and does it have any influence of history in the way it works. And so our own center where I'm working, MPIDSA, it has been working on India's historical traditions, religious texts, from Arthashastra, Michael Liebig and Colonel Gautam and Saurabh Mishra. They have written a splendid many volumes of books on Arthashastra and Niti Sara of Kamandaka and the Kural literature of Tamil, trying to find out the great tradition of strategic thinking in India. Now, I will just give a very brief and a very facile. I'll not go very deep. You may even question me whether I'm giving the really profound version of Kautilya's Arthashastra, because that is not the focus of my talk. But I would like to go through that. Here we must have heard about the 4 upayas which the Arthashastra gives us. Sam, which is counseling or trying to get people to understand our point of view and develop friendships, which is one way of tackling any other, maybe a friend or maybe an adversary. And then if you want to actually win over somebody, you might also offer gifts, economic incentives. Let's have economic free zone or some kind of a business deal so that we could develop a relationship. And still, if there is an adversarial tendency and hostility, you can use dand, which could be military kind of punishment, or it could be economic or what have you. And then there is the 4th option of bhed, which is creating dissension and split within the ranks of the enemy. And then you have the Shadguniya. We don't have enough time for that, but which are the 6 strategies, the 6 states in which various states find themselves, which is Shanti, Vigraha, which is war, Asana, which is neutrality, and Samsraya, which is alliance, double dealing, which is not to have 2 enemies at the same time, keep one enemy happy to be taken on later, so that you first attend to the more immediate threat, and then preparing for war. And then you have the mandala theory, which talks about that generally every nation wants to extend its territory and boundaries, and it is almost always invariably in conflict with its neighboring state. So a neighbor is generally the enemy, and the neighbor's neighbor becomes your friend, and it goes on like that. So the neighbor's neighbor and that neighbor's neighbor would be your enemy. So the idea is it goes through that mathematical equation of 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. 1 being yourself. So the 3rd state in that progression would be your friend, and the 5th state would be your friend, and the 7th state would be your friend. And similarly, the 2nd state, which is your immediate neighbor, would be an enemy, and the 4th will be an enemy, and the 6th will be an enemy, and in that way. So these theories, I'm just giving you a brief introduction. To my mind, maybe at a strategic level, we have learnt a lot and admired Arthashastra a lot. But the texts which have deeply influenced Indian way of thinking is the Vedanta. And when I talk about the Vedanta, I'm talking about the 4 Shruti texts of the 4 Vedas. Vedanta is just the culmination and fulfillment of the Vedic texts, which are the Rig Ved, the Samved, Yajurved, and Atharved. But Vedanta texts are actually Prasthanatriya, They are the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. These three texts give you the full fruit and the full knowledge of the Vedas. So they are called the Vedanta. They are the ant or the finality of the Vedic knowledge. And so these three texts are considered to be the basis of Indian spiritual thought at its highest level. From here, you find the Puranas and the great epics Ramayana and Mahabharata and all the other texts actually emanating from here. So these are the core ideals. And within it, there are different schools of darshana. I mean, Vedanta itself is a school of darshan. There are 6 schools of darshan. Vedanta is one of them. And then you have got these different schools of Vedanta. One is Advaitvad, which is, there is no dualism. Advait means dual. What it actually means is that there is no duality in reality. There is no multiplicity in reality. It is a slightly mind-bending concept. It says that the world appears to us as very different, very out there, with entities, different entities, multiplicity of people, multiplicity of animals and the world, but actually all is one. This is just an external projection and a very, very refracted projection of the one eternal truth which lies within everybody, which is the Atma. So when you shed off your ego and you go deep into the Atma, you are part of the universe. You are part of the Brahman, which is the ultimate reality. So the ultimate reality lies within a person, not without. All of this projection which we see outside is just Maya. It is just a fake, false projection of multitudes. So it is, we don't have time to go, it is a slightly mind-bending concept, as I told you. But this idea of oneness of creation, that there is no creator and creation, creator and creator are together, it is monism. This idea of monism, of actually doubting the 5 senses and going deeper and looking deeper into the real elements of truth which lies behind the superficiality. That is something which is very fundamental to Indian thought. Now, here I have just named you the various, but that is only the school of Advaita. You have also the Dvaitvad. Advaita school has been expounded brilliantly by Adi Shankaracharya. But if you look at the Dvaitvad school, it has been expounded by Swami Ramanujam. And you have the Vishishta Dvaitvad, which is expounded by, I'm sorry, right now it's escaping me. But you have these various schools of Dvait and Advait. Anyway, we don't have time for going into deeper speculation here. But if you look at Indian strategic doctrines, and now I'm coming to the strategic domain and I'll come to international relations of India, you will hardly find any coinage coming from Arthashastra. Hardly. However, if you look at our constitution, you will find the phrase Satyamev Jayate. It comes from Mundaka Upanishad. If you look at Vasudev Kutumbakam, it comes from Maha Upanishad, which is another Vedanta text. If you look at Aham Brahmasmi, it is also a Vedantist text. So many of our doctrinal, foreign policy doctrines actually come from Vedanta texts. And they have been more influential, to my mind, in framing India's foreign policy, and I would say even India's foreign policy orientations. And when we are actually looking at India, when you are a student of strategic culture, you should know that you are not supposed to ascribe good or bad values to anything. A thing is what it is. It has good and maybe a negative in it. But who's going to determine what is good and what is negative? So you have to just see a thing for what it is, without trying to ascribe anything negative or positive to it. So when you have a reflective disposition, you do not take anything at face value. You try to introspect and brood and think about it. You have a reflective disposition. You play a ball, in a cricket sense, on the back foot. You are not naturally, like Joe Root is a very good batsman who takes the back foot. If you see all the great Bradman and others, they used to go to the back foot. So it is a reflective disposition which we have. In international relations, when we talk of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, in a way it is coming out from this Indian idea that all of the universe is actually one, and it is Brahman. There is nothing out of it. It is Nirakar, Nirvishesh, and my dear friend, if you can, Nirgun. So it has no attribute. It has no attribute, and it is formless. It is Brahman. So the idea of form only comes when it is in this level of reality. But in its essence, all of it is one. So the monistic idea is predominant. So because of that, the Indian mind does not have problems with the other. It's very welcoming. It is very hospitable, because it thinks by nature that there's nothing all out there. So within that school of thinking, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam comes as part of it. Whatever is out there is actually my family. It is all part of me. It is all part of myself. When I go into me, I'll find that also. All answers lie within me, not without me. That is a tendency which India has had, and that has had its pluses and minuses, both ways. The other thing which when you come to Aham Brahmasmi, is a great idea, which has given Indian culture a great amount of resilience. Because you feel that you have you have the creator within you. You are the creator. So no matter what the adversity, where other cultures have been completely swooped and drowned, like Egyptian civilization or whatever Roman civilization have been colonized, India has retained itself because of its understanding and because of its awareness of self-worth. Again, so if you look at India's foreign policies, you will find that India does not make very straight-jacketed alliances, because it is reclusive also. It will not say, I'm with America now entirely and I'm with China now entirely. It retains its own. I will see my interest and I will decide. I will see my values and I will decide. Whether it was from the very beginning the non-aligned movement, or whether it is the strategic autonomy of today's times, India does not like to fall into any bracket which the big powers try to impose upon it, whether you are with us or whether you are against us. This gives a kind of a independence to Indian strategic thought, Indian strategic culture. So it is, on the one hand, highly hospitable, highly overreaching. It wants to reach out and embrace the whole world. It still maintains its own. It is still sequestered. It still holds its own. It does not just completely subsume itself into anything which comes in front of it. And that gives it a great vitality. So here I'm not talking about tactical moves which Arthashastra talks about. If you are in war, okay, then this is the way you should kill them. I'm talking about the basic foundational doctrinal values on the way we think of ourselves and the other and interact with the other. If you look at most of our heroes, national heroes who fought for India's independence, they were not people fascinated by Arthashastra so much. They were fascinated by Vedanta. if you look at Subhash Chandra Bose, if you look at Vivekananda, if you look at Shivaji, Shivaji's mother taught him the Bhagavad Gita. If you look at Mahatma Gandhi, they all said that Mahatma Gandhi used to study the Bhagavad Gita. Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, across the board, whether they are from the Congress party or they are from the other side, all of them, when it came to self-awareness of what is the nation of India, they went back to Vedanta. Whether it was Ram Mohan Roy initially, and then Dayanand Saraswati, who started the Arya Samaj, they were all going back to the Vedas. That is the source, that is the spring which gives India its core identity and its core values. So I think rather than looking at a facile treatise on strategic matters, we need to look much deeper. And here I will say, here in this slide I have already discussed some of the issues that India, because of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, is sometimes may appear to be overly hospitable to foreigners. But if you look at the other side of it, that the entire Brahman is within me, India holds its own. India is not overawed by anybody's power. It has not been overawed by Western influence. It still has its own literature, its own film industry, its own Atmanirbharta, this idea that we need to be our own self. We have everything within us. So that is the great vitality of India. Then there is this great aspect of Nishkam Karma, which comes with the third text of Bhagavad Gita, which is after the Upanishad and the Brahma Sutras. The Bhagavad Gita is actually the Karma Yogic version of the Gyan Yogic Upanishads. Upanishads are little reclusive. They are for sages and saints. When you go to the hills, you become a recluse and you try to commune with the divine. But Bhagavad Gita says you have to work in this world. And through karma, through righteous action, you can attain moksha. You don't need to go to the hills. So it tries to give a practical version of the very gyan which you attain through meditation in the Upanishadic way. And how do you attain that moksha? Is by conducting righteous action which is not driven by your instincts. So the Sattvic Karam Yogi is the ideal. That a person, there are these three terms here, Rajsik and the Tamsik. The Tamsik is indolent, negative thinking, sab bura hoga. So whenever you try to fight a war, whenever you try to engage in any kind of an enterprise, you should not have a Tamsik outlook. You should not have even a Rajsik outlook that you are very passionate, you are doing it for wealth, you are doing it for greed, so you are trying to become a colonial power or you are having a hegemonic. You have to be a Sattvic. You are doing for the right cause, not for your own cause, but that right cause is enough of motivation for you to attain the impossible. So that kind of a thinking, that Sattvic Karam Yogi, which inspired Mahatma Gandhi, that is the message of Lord Krishna to Arjuna. That you have to fight not because you were wronged. Yes, you were wronged, but you are trying to establish dharma. You are trying to establish righteous values in society so that this fight which you are waging is to establish right from wrong, is to establish dharma in society. It is not just a personal issue which is justified against the Kauravas, but it is more about, people will say that, okay, the might is always right. No, you have to establish justice and righteousness is right, not might is right. And so we have in the Bhagavad Gita the idea of dharma and dharma yudh also. The Bhagavad Gita in many places talks about ahimsa. That is what is the ideal. But if dharma itself has been violated to the extent that ahimsa becomes completely impractical, then you have to wage a righteous war, which is the dharma yudh. But there are very strict instructions on what you should not violate. What are the rules of engagement in war? So, jus ad bellum and jus in bello, all those concepts are there in Bhagavad Gita, the rules of engagement here. The idea that of avidya and maya is, I think if you have read Immanuel Kant, you would understand that there's a noumenal world and then there's the phenomenal world. So the noumenal world is outside time and space, which is forever, which is how things really are, but we see them through the prism of time and space. If you look at Vedanta, it goes many times further than even Kant goes. But the very idea that in a war, things as they may appear to be may not be so, what we call the fog of war. In diplomacy, somebody may be trying to give you a false perception. I'm very strong, you have to accept my terms and all that. So this idea that whatever you know is wrong, it comes from Vedanta. Whatever you know, whatever you have learned in life is wrong. Now look at the world from your own eyes. This is a great, great educator. Sometimes because of our extreme readings and reading a lot of books and all that, we do not develop our own ideas. So this idea of avidya and to understand what is Maya. So let all information come. Okay, I'm studying it. I'm studying it because from a very neutral point of view, but I will see through. This gives Indian thought, Indian strategists a lot of perspective. If you look at, we sometimes deride Indian history and our own fighters. We have also had great victories. It is only the losses which actually had a consequence, which we regard as possibly a problem. But India has always had great warriors and great generals. The great Chola Empire extended its boundaries way into the Southeast Asia. So the idea of, if you look at the Second World War and the First World War, we have had the bravest of soldiers, which is internationally recognized. But we are, because of our training, we have had the best of records in human rights and other things because of the Sattvic tradition which is still with us. And the idea that what is Maya, which is also, there is a term in Niti Sara of Kamandika, which is Indrajal. Indrajal talks about what America did to Soviet Union, that it was going into Star Wars programs, going into space, building new types of space weapons and all. That forced Soviet Union to invest heavily into space weaponry, which was one of the causes for why its economy collapsed. So you create a false kind of a Indrajal that this is the threat which we are doing, just in order to waylay the other. So the understanding that sometimes propaganda or a false image could actually waylay you from where you are, that perception actually is very helpful even in India's strategic thought. And also, when it comes to Lord Krishna's use of strategic deceit, when Arjun is wary of actually fighting, he says so many people will be killed. He says nobody ever dies. This is your misperception. He's talking of the phenomenal and the noumenal. He calls of the Vyavarik Drishti and the Parmarth Drishti. The Parmarth Drishti is the ultimate truth for which you have to work. In the Vyavarik Drishti is the practical, what you have to do. But you should never, while doing your practical job, never be completely neglect the Parmarth Drishti. Suppose you are doing a job and you are doing it very well and you are feeding your family, but you have a greater purpose in life. You have to give something to humanity. You have a greater social responsibility also. So while you are doing your daily chores, you should also be aware of the greater good which you should be contributing to. So when we are, suppose, engaging in war, We should always have the Paramarth Drishti. We are doing it for the greater good. And we will cease to be in a state of war once we achieve our aims. War is not the end, it is a means. So, Krishna is trying to say that you should always have the noumenal in your mind while you are doing the phenomenal. The Yatharth Drishti, the practical side, the practical vision, along with the Paramarth Drishti, the overall, the overarching vision. So these are some of the profound concepts which you can get out from the Vedanta texts. And it is actually had, the greatness of the Bhagavad Gita is that it is in the Mahabharata. And Mahabharata has a great appeal because, as I was discussing earlier with a friend here, that Mahabharata, everything is grey in Mahabharata. Just as real life. You do not know who's right and who's wrong. He's partially right, he's partially wrong. So when things are in chaos, you do not know what is what. So the Bhagavad Gita is trying to establish dharma, trying to establish how we can decipher right from wrong. And that's why Bhagavad Gita, some people doubt whether Bhagavad Gita is a later edition. Some historians do that thing. But I think Mahabharata makes no sense without the Bhagavad Gita or otherwise. Because it then tells you what this confusion is all about and how we can get out of that confusion. So don't get into this world where you will have half virtues, semi-virtues, and look into the depth, develop profundity. And these ideas have been central to Indian strategic thought. And also when it comes to strategic deception, if it is all Maya, you find Krishna. Krishna only uses deception when the field is not level, when the other side has some invincible pluses to it. He forces Arjuna to fight. With his Virat Roop, he could have actually extinguished the opposition himself. But he wants people to evolve themselves through a struggle. And so he's always cajoling Arjun and other of the Pandavas to wage this war. And so the bigger thing here is, but however, when somebody like a Karna or a Duryodhan, not a Duryodhan, but a Drona or somebody has some gifts, some invincible things to it, deception is fine. If the other side has a nuclear technology which you don't have, that is an added. So it is your first thing that you should remove that. You should remove that and make it a level playing field, even if deception is needed for that. If you need to take away the shield from Karna, or whatever the protective shield, you have to do that. This is a great, and you find that in Shivaji, he actually might have been influenced by the Bhagavad Gita, because he's a great master in strategic deception. So if we look into the Mahabharata, which is actually the practical form of a theoretical Upanishadic knowledge, it is like playing it in the phenomenal world, what is there in the noumenal. We can find more strategic lessons, in-depth lessons for our IR, for our theories of international relations, as opposed to what he was very rightly mentioning, Dr. Pandya, that the West tells us about structuralism and about realism and about all kinds of theories, constructivism. But here is the wealth which we need to explore. And it is not for nothing that we find so many Western scholars, not just Oppenheimer, but so many Niels Bohr and Whitehead and Arnold Toynbee, Aldous Huxley, Schopenhauer, whose entire philosophy was based on Vedanta, and Albert Einstein, actually taking Vedanta as the greatest of texts. And even today in the quantum world, we are finding the idea of consciousness, the way consciousness can affect matter. That in itself is making great sense these days. So I think I'll have to conclude here, and I hope I made some sense. Thank you.